Okay, so I'm trying to click present. It's not working. Okay, my article I chose was Battling Saltwater on the Mississippi New Orleans Region Faces Its Next Challenge. And I got this article from USA Today and it is linked. And here we go. So the info on the current event was the event was published on October 8th and it talked about how the water levels in the Mississippi are so low that the saltwater wedge is poking in on the Mississippi River, for lack of a better word. It is intruding into the Mississippi River and causing there to be high salt levels. So this is affecting people's drinking water because places like New Orleans and several places in Louisiana only have the Gulf of Mexico or the Mississippi River, and obviously the Gulf of Mexico is not giving them the fresh water they need. And it talked about how the fresh water is down because there's just kind of an overall drought due to global warming, and the areas around Louisiana have not received a lot of rainfall this year. So it's hurting a lot of places near there's freshwater access, and the salt water is heavier than the fresh water. So it's weighing down, and there's a wedge of it up under the fresh water. But the fresh water is so low that it's getting a lot more salt water in. And normally there's enough fresh water to push that salt water back and kind of even it out. There is brackish water in Louisiana, but it usually doesn't mix because there's enough fresh water to push back the salt water. So once their water levels are low, the salt water is pushing too much into the Mississippi River, and these communities are not getting the fresh water that they need. So that is my article I chose. And then the science standard I chose to correlate with that was obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to demonstrate the water cycle. So this first part talks about understanding the cycle, conducting experiments, and the second part is about developing models or understanding all different aspects. And the clarification statement was that students should understand the water cycle path doesn't follow a single pathway. So I plan on using the fact that this is abnormal for the water cycle to teach that the water cycle doesn't always follow the same path. This drought is throwing it off. So that was my standard I chose. And this standard correlates with the river because the water cycle is thrown off. There's obviously not enough rain for it to evaporate up and create enough rainfall. There's not enough water coming in, and the salt water is intruding. So the water cycle is off, and it's causing a chain reaction when our natural processes are off. So for teaching the standard, I chose for the first part, it was about planning and carrying out investigations. I would ask students after reading the article about, I said first that saltwater salinity ties into the lack of rain because the salt is encroaching into the Mississippi River because of the lack of rain to hold it back. So I talked about how I would discuss with my students why they think the salt was pushing through before I discussed that normally there's enough water holding it back. So I would ask that question to pose a discussion. And then once they have discussed, I'm going to move myself around. I would explain that it's because salt water is so much heavier when it's in water. It's not just regular water, it's salt water. It's weighing down, it's below, and it's pushing through. So we would discuss that together, but I would ask my students first, why do you think that's happening? And have them think before we speak together. Then I chose the second part is about understanding models. So I said this current event connects with the substandard because with models sometimes the water cycle is interrupted. That was the main part. It was a clarification statement in this standard. So I'd have students look at the live camera of Mississippi River, which I did link, and I would ask them what part they think is causing the water to be so low. On this part, you can see the bank more. You can see the water is low for sure. You can kind of see where it used to be. So I'm hopeful they would notice that, but if not, I would definitely point it out, and it'd be an interesting way to use technology in this presentation. So then we would share, and I would explain that it's because of the precipitation levels. There is not enough fresh water flowing in to hold that little salt wedge back. So it's inching forward into the river and leaking salt water into the fresh water for people. And then I chose reaching other standards. I chose a social studies standard to locate important physical and man-made features in the United States, and the Mississippi River was one of these. Since we're going to be looking at it, I could definitely show them on a map the location of Mississippi River, and I would want them to understand where it is, what places are affected by it. We would discuss how New Orleans only has the Gulf of Mexico or them to connect to, really. There are some minor water sources, but it is their main one. So we talked about the dire need that they have to have fresh water coming from the Mississippi River in New Orleans. And it is such a highly populated and traveled place that it is very important for people there to have their fresh water. And that would tie that standard in, and they would see it on a map. We would go over that a lot. So that was a fun standard to tie into that. And then for math, I decided to tie and measure time and objects that exist in the world to solve real life mathematical problems and analyze graphical displays of data to answer relevant questions. So my plan for this was to show students graphs of rainfall, graphs of water level, and we could discuss that this is how scientists know this is happening. We don't just go, oh, the water is salty. We see it coming in. They study this because it is a water source for everyone. They keep a close watch on it, keep that data. We would start to look at that data and talk about, I would pose the question, how do we think scientists notice this? What are scientists measuring when they're measuring this? How do they do that? We get into that process about salinity, rainfall, graphing, and these are all mathematical processes that help us keep that kind of data. So then I linked the other resources. I linked another article. I linked a precipitation map of the U.S. We would definitely look around that area and see that it is lower. We'd look at other areas that are lower. And then I thought we could possibly look at other years, see how it's, slowly decreasing rainfall. And then I linked a salinity index when we get into saltwater. I would kind of show them the areas of the U.S. This is updated a lot. So we could kind of see that saltwater, hopefully, in the Mississippi River. We could compare it to the ocean. We could look at other parts of the world where salinity is high and kind of discuss that as well. Just opens the conversation for something that's not necessarily in their standard, but is a skill they will be learning, and it's a fun topic to introduce. So, yeah. Thank you for watching my presentation. Don't know how to stop it. Stop.